Let's go to line number 10 now and speak to the newly elected Liberal member of the House of Assembly, serving the folks of Virginia Waters, Cathy Bennett. Good morning, Cathy. You're on the air.
Good morning, Patty. I have to say it was really nice to hear the conversation about Don Johnson. He was a really close friend of my father's, and I could certainly relate to many of the things that you just said. Don was certainly a force to be reckoned with, not only in the sports world, but in the community.
He got so much done and did it the right way. Don knew that the meeting rooms were going to be contentious sometimes, but he was level-headed. He knew what the right thing was for the athletes, and that's how he focused his attentions. I couldn't have more respect for anybody than I do for Don.
Absolutely. We're in violent agreement there, for sure.
Good.
Patty, just wanted to call in. I had a chance to listen to some of your preamble this morning, and also, keeping ahead of the news and some of the stories that VOCM is covering today. And I have to tell you that, it's really curious to me, Premier Marshall's comments with regards to Muskrat Falls. I think the headline is, "It will continue until it's too expensive." I find it ironic that, the Premier is suggesting that in any shape or form that his government would, at this point, stop the project. I think really his comments are, in my opinion, symptomatic of a deeper issue with the current government that I think you articulated in your preamble, and that's about, government's responsibility and accountability to manage taxpayers' money. And, you mentioned about the need for making sure that the priorities are clearly identified, and sometimes you have to make tough decisions when you're, spending taxpayers' money in the interest of the people of the province. And I think, the government has, this government has governed in the most prosperous time in our provincial history. They appear to want the credit and want the votes for leading, but sometimes they don't want to accept the accountability for their own fiscal management. And I think, the job of government is to really ensure that taxpayers' money is spent in the best interest of the people of the province. And part of that is when you make a decision to spend taxpayers' money, you hold yourself accountable for delivering on that plan, just like they need to with this particular project. They need to make sure that there's a contingency plan in place from the very beginning if there's cost overruns. The Premier's belief, as I said earlier, that we can somehow ever walk away from Muskrat, my question would be, what exactly is his plan B? This is a project that's underway, but more importantly, it's a project to make sure the lights stay on the Avalon Peninsula and other parts of the province. And how the Premier can flippantly make a comment that is, the project will continue until it gets too expensive, speaks to the deeper issue of, does the current government have our interest, the province and the people's best interest, in place when they're spending money and prioritizing how they're spending money?
But I think I understand your point, but how do you arrive at a point where we're talking about the dollars and cents? Do you not have to nudge up against the potential reality that is going to be too expensive and not be satisfying that phrase of lowest cost option? How do you make those decisions without actually dealing with the reality? And what form can Plan B take? It's either proceed as normal or stop. Is there anything in the middle?
But see, it's not just proceed as normal. I think it's also you build a plan, and then you make sure you manage that plan so it delivers on the targets that you set. I mean, if you or I were going to build a house, we'd make sure that we knew what our budget was in advance, and we'd make sure that we had a contingency fund set up, and that we'd build that house as close to the budget as we possibly can, and we'd make hard decisions as the project unfolded.
Well, yeah, but we'd get a cheaper stove and do away with the crown moldings if we got somewhere close to it. But when it comes to this project,
those are the types of, that exact example, Patty, are the types of decisions that need to be made as we manage this project, and that's one of the things. It's great to see, the current government taking, a more progressive or more open tone on things, but the reality is that when you're spending $6-7 billion, there's a requirement, and not just $6 or $7 billion on a capital project like Muskrat Falls, but when you're spending almost the same amount of money in provincial spending, there's a responsibility to manage every single cent of that. And whether we talk about road constructions, investment in hospitals, all those things that you referenced that may be the priorities of the people, there's also an equal accountability to make sure that money is spent in the most fiscally responsible way. And you can't just say, look, here's the plan, I'm going to turn my back to the plan and let it execute itself without putting some checks and balances in place to make sure that it's managed.
Do you think those checks and balances aren't in place, though, Cathy, you have a working relationship, and I know you're familiar with the management team at Nalcor. Do you have the faith required in Ed Martin and Mr. Bennett that they can indeed execute this plan, that they do have the contingencies and oversights that they work with and manage on a day-to-day basis?
I think there's a tremendous amount of options that can always be considered when you're building any large capital project based on the limited experience that I've seen around not only Muskrat Falls but other capital projects. And you know what? I'd suggest that some of us who've built any projects understand that there's things that you can do during the construction phase and the building phase that, you know, can help to keep the costs under control. What I'm confused about and what I don't understand is how the current government could even suggest that, you know, we'd be at a point ever that we could pull back. What we should be saying, and what the Liberal Party has been saying, and Dwight said it last week, is that we need to make sure that the best ideas for making sure this project works in the best interest of everyone in the province, you know, nobody is going to, we'll all win if the project's successful, but equally we will all lose if it's not successful. And that means there's a requirement for us to be very disciplined in how we make sure we manage that project, and also how we innovate to make sure we deliver the project within the scopes and within the KPIs that were originally set out. But it comes down, Patty, to a fiscal accountability and a fiscal responsibility that I question whether or not this government has clearly been focused on. You know, when we have to make decisions, in the short term, you know, we need to be making decisions around the long term and how money is going to best support the needs of the people of the province. And we can't waste and you and I have had this conversation before. There's a huge amount of needs, right? There's things that we want, but then there's things that we need. And the things that you need are the things that you have to figure out how to get the money for. And the way you do that is making sure that you don't waste one single solitary cent on anything that doesn't make sense. I mean, look at the apprenticeship program that the government's been trying to manage through for the last couple of years, and the amount of money that's been spent compared to the outcome of the amount of individuals that actually have been helped and been able to get through those programs. Yeah. That's an example of money. I call it slipping through the cracks. And we can't afford, as a province of 500,000 plus people, to allow any cents to slip through. So, I'm really looking forward to May 5th was when the swearing in is, and hopefully be in the House of Assembly that afternoon. And I'm looking forward to asking some of these questions in the House of Assembly, because we have to do a better job. This government has to do a better job of making sure that taxpayers' money is respected and reverently invested in the best interest of the people.
Managing the money, I think that's my number one thing. I have a social conscience, and I think people who know me know that full well. But the management of the money, I don't know if we've exaggerated, and not you or anyone else in particular, I don't know if we've exaggerated the absence of oversight and the absence of adherence to the budget and absence to the fundamental approach to strict adherence to the bottom line. And I think we probably have done a better job than people say, especially those who were vehemently opposed to the project, which is not you, because you've long been in favor of and have spoken about oversight and management as being the key feature, and I think you're right. So I think maybe we've gone too far. Some people have, and the critique or the criticism is levied, but that's their right, and they can do whatever the hell they see fit. One question, Cathy, we have a lot of issues coming up here now with, even Mr. Coleman, he's trying to deal with the blind trust that's required and transitioning out of some of his control and interest in his company. People wonder about who has what interest based on what sort of public policy and availability to react to tenders. Do you have any business interests that are dealing with the government? Do you have any business interests that deal with Muskrat Falls?
Absolutely not. As a matter of fact, I made sure very clearly that last year, when I offered myself as a candidate in the leadership, the Liberal leadership, which, by the way, was a very open process with 30,000+ people signing up, over 20,000+ people participating, with lots of debates and lots of openness around let the people pick the leader, not the party pick the leader. One of the things I did before I stepped up on the stage at the Capitol was made sure that I cleared the decks, because I think if you're going to enter politics, there's a responsibility to make sure that conflicts and things that are that potentially could be there that could could be misconstrued are cleared out of the way. So I made sure that every single, company, every single piece of investment that I had, I cleared the decks. Because I think politicians have to have the integrity to be able to, as you said this morning, sometimes you got to make tough decisions. Sometimes you got to, be brave. Sometimes you've got to, help prioritize things in the best interest of the people. And you can only do that when your motives and your reasons for doing it are crystal clear. And so from my perspective, I cleared my decks last year, and I'm happy that I did it because it allows me to say the things that I say from the motive of I believe that we have to, as government and a Liberal government, act in the best interest of the people of the province.
Cathy, another quick question about Muskrat Falls and the money. People are generally concerned, and one of my major concern, of course, with the money and how that affects my bill. One of the issues that I always thought would have been an easier sell for government is if they took the surplus power sale, whether that be Nova Scotia or elsewhere, and they contributed that to lowering my bills as opposed to put it in the Treasury to do what they see fit. And unfortunately, that would be political decisions being made. Where do you stand on that front? Because I think that's a real critical piece of the puzzle. If and when your party ever does get to sit in the seat of government, is a decision yet to be made. What do you think?
Well, the best way for me to answer that question, and I've been, as you can appreciate, and I'm sure your listeners can appreciate, since the election on April the 9th, I've been very busy going through my orientation and training to get me ready to go into the House of Assembly. And, I've been poring over documents like the budget documents, et cetera. And one of the things that has struck me is, the difficulty in being able to assess what the estimates are, or what government says, this is what we're going to spend money on. And then on the other side of the coin, actually reconciling that publicly. Like I'm having difficulty, and the people that I'm working with are having difficulty recognizing, where the estimates line up with the public accounts. And in simple terms, what that means is your budget versus actual. You say you're going to spend this much money, and this is what you actually spend.
But of course, we don't even know what the sale of power will be unless they are, negotiated contracts with industry. The sale of power in Nova Scotia, for instance, will be a floating number because it's based on a long-term covenant on market rates. So we can't forecast it and talk about how we are pigeonholing that money for a spend in the future. It's going to be a floating number. It's going to vary every year. So I think it's philosophically, and the concept of it coming in and being afforded to lessen my bills it's either that or it goes straight into the coffers. It can't be one or the other, or right, a combination of both.
But my point is that government has multiple revenue streams, right, that it has to manage. And fundamentally, if you put all of the revenue from all of the sources in one bucket and you compare it to what you actually spend, you should be able to manage, you should be able to clearly see what performance is. And I'm having difficulty seeing that.
Yeah,
and not only me. I mean, there's organizations out there like the C.D. Howe Institute. There's other organizations that have looked at Newfoundland and Labrador's budgeting process and said, hang on now, this is a little bit convoluted, and it's difficult to see how this apple on the left-hand side of the ledger matches this apple on the right-hand side of the ledger. So when you think about what you're talking about, which is an additional revenue stream coming into the province from something we're going to sell, I get worried that it's going to get thrown into this bucket of stuff that's going to get kind of mixed up, and we're not going to be able to track it. And for me, that's one of the things that we've got to be able to deliver as a Liberal government, is a fiscal accountability. That, Dwight talks about being an open party, and I think that's just not about being open, first off, to what the people want, but it's also being open and transparent around your performance, your financial performance.
Yeah, and I accept your point on how you refer to how you forecast in the additional revenue stream. I guess if we think we're going to have to subsidize people who can't keep up with those bills based on the hikes that are coming, whether it be from hydro or gas or anything else under the sun, if the high water mark is 400 million, some people contest that that's a realistic view of how much money could come in annually. You can indeed, I believe, pigeonhole or to set aside and forecast if we hit 250 million every year, that'll go towards lessening power bills. The other 150 million, if it ever comes to pass, go into general coffers. Something that gives people a little more comfort that they won't be up against an unmanageable hydro bill. We're going to have to do some sort of subsidies in the first place. Another example of that for me is gas tax and road work. I think we can indeed look at some forms of revenue and deal with specific issues based on that revenue alone, and the other things, oil royalties, natural resources royalties of all varieties. They can be general coffers, just like taxation. I just throw it out there because I think it's an an interesting conversation.
Absolutely. And, the fundamental thing for me, Patty, and what I hope at the end, whenever my political career ends, whenever the people of Virginia Waters decide that, I haven't fulfilled my mandate of serving their interests first, and I'm no longer a politician, I hope at the end of the day that, my kids can look at me and say, Mom, you know what? You made sure that nobody was left behind. Because ultimately, while, we want to make sure that we have fiscal responsibility and accountability, nobody, I think, in our province wants to have somebody making a decision between whether or not they're going to eat or turn the lights on. And while the solutions might have to be creative in how we figure that out,
yep.
The discipline and the decisions, as you said earlier, are tough decisions that require us to prioritize what's important to us as a province, what's important to us as a people, and then make sure that we as a people hold government accountable for delivering on our vision of Newfoundland and Labrador.
Yeah, and tough decisions as well has been absent in the last number of years. There's been an awful lot of money put into the budget, borrowing money to pay the bills, and yet the priorities don't jive with what people are saying. There's something to that, whether it's a flawed process or it's political courage. I think there's probably a combination of both. I'm really late getting to the news. Anything else very quickly, Cathy, to wrap up? Real quickly,
just want to say a huge shout out to Clara Hughes. I mean, what an incredible, incredible lady. So brave, and so many accomplishments, and now to take on, the important message of mental health and how we all need to be aware of the impact it has in our community and our own lives. I just want to say a huge shout out to her. Hope she's safe on the highway, and looking forward to seeing her here on the east coast of the island.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of Clara Hughes, no doubt about it. Nice speaking with you, Cathy.
Thanks, Patty. Bye-bye.
All the best. Bye-bye.